I think I have to wait a moment. All right, welcome everyone to New Hampshire Peace Action's Peace and Justice Conversation Series online. For 40 years, New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all. A future that's based on cooperation instead of competition and conflict, and where mutual benefit and shared security leads to a more peaceful and just global community. In that spirit of respect, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are doing our work on Nidakina, the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki people. We honor with gratitude the land, the waterways, and the Alnobak, the people who have been stewarding throughout the generations. Quick word on Zoom etiquette. We love it when you keep your video on if you're comfortable with that, given that we're recording and have that capability. But we do ask that you keep your audio muted and start by using the chat for questions. Usually we have time a little later to do some hand raising and let people ask their own. But for now, if you can use chat, that is great. So tonight, our topic is the selling of war. And this past winter, myself and some other folks, including Will at New Hampshire Peace Action, we're talking about the media and the power of the media to really shape a message and push people one way or another, and the fact that it's something that we need to continue to talk about as a community. So we learned that a good friend of the organization, Dr. Leo Sandy, could join us to talk about that. So Leo is a professor emeritus at Plymouth State University, where he taught in the counselor education and social psychology program and also taught peace studies. He's also helped organize programs before with New Hampshire Peace Action. And tonight he's going to help us explore how pervasive militarism and nationalism are used to sell war to young people and to all of us, and then to understand the ways we might challenge the propaganda of empire and the war machine. So Leo, I'm going to hand it over to you now. I'll be watching chat, and but you can go ahead and get started. Everyone, let's welcome Leo.
Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me all right? Okay. So you can see these pictures here are pretty startling. These young boys being groomed for the Third Reich, and it keeps going on in other forms. And I look forward to your input and your views as well. I think one of the first things we have to understand is the
Leo?
Yeah.
Can I ask you to try to, right now your screen, we're seeing a lot of the background. It's not just your slide. Is there a way you can like make the screen, the slideshow, fill it up and see what you can do so we really can? Oh, there you go. Great. Thank you.
All right.
Well done.
I think it's important to understand children's development to see how the enticement to war happens with children, for example. So between the ages of 6 and 11, children are in what's called Piaget's concrete stage of development, basically. They see things in black and white and either or terms. They don't engage in much critical thinking, nor do they question authority. They are in the conventional moral level in stage 3, which is called good boy, nice girl, where they seek acceptance from adults and want to please them. So this is an age that cults and gangs and the military really like to entice kids, because these kids are trusting in adults and are not, don't question their authority. So they're obedient, they like structure, and they enjoy following rules. Cults, gangs, again, fanatical religious groups, military organizations focus on children at this age because they're easier to manipulate than adults, and they believe what adults say. So they're ripe for this kind of indoctrination. Beliefs and attitude and behavior inculcated at this stage are more resistant to change. So when kids are taught these kinds of things, it's very difficult to change them later on. It's not impossible. And then children between the ages of 12 and 18 are in the what's called the formal operation stage. They're capable of abstract and hypothetical thinking, but they have to be prepared for it through a curriculum that provides for problem solving, critical thinking, dialogue, a pedagogy of discomfort, which means presenting controversial issues within the classroom in a just community classroom where opinions and beliefs are respected and encouraged. So it's a climate of safety. And when kids have that, they're able to discuss their opposing views and so forth. And so if we don't have these kinds of, if we don't have this divisive concepts actually occurring in the classroom, kids will graduate from high school still in the concrete operational stage. They'll still be thinking in black and white terms, and then they'll vote, which is a scary prospect. Children at this age have a strong need to belong to something bigger than themselves, and they look for groups that will make them feel secure, powerful, excited, strong, and useful. Loyalty, self-sacrifice, patriotism, and nationalism develop at this stage. So again, they're ripe for that. The military does not like people in their 20s because they've already formed their views, and they're not as easily manipulated as younger people are. These children have a strong respect for law and order. And these children are in the process of developing an identity. And what the military does is it superimposes an identity on them. They really don't develop their own identity, because in order to develop one's identity, you have to actually question authority. You have to find out what beliefs other people have that you agree and disagree with. And so you have to test those beliefs out on people. And that's not allowed in the military. Diffuse identities may join a group for any thrill or excitement the group may provide, and then move on to more exciting groups. So these kids are not as likely to develop a real strong affiliation with the group, but they'll go from group to group, and they'll do destructive things while they're in that group. Foreclosed identities are those dependent teenagers who believe what they're told without question. They take in other people's views, and those views become their own, and they're not subject to any critical examination. So you'll see, for example, a lot of kids who look, act, talk, and believe exactly what their parents are, and they look like clones of their parents. They don't disagree with them at all. They just take in what their parents say, believe it, and act on it, and so forth. And those are the kids that cults and gangs and the military really like to go after. They're very easy marks. These people they value stability over change, and they find safety and security in cults and gangs, fanatical religious groups, or in the military that meet their dependency needs. The quid pro quo is that these groups watch out for these people and protect them, and in return, they get their total loyalty and obedience, and they do whatever those groups want them to do. And so that's a scary situation. They relinquish their consciences for the protection and structure the group provides, and they engage in behavior within a group that they would less likely engage in as individuals. For example, their repressed impulses find expression in the group, where they are more likely to be more repressed as individuals. It's the mob kind of thing. They are very susceptible to indoctrination because they want, I can't see my notes here. They want all the answers, but do not want to ask any questions. They follow the principle of certainty, that there are things that are true and not ever questioned. And you can see that kind of thing happening right now in society. However, children who are identity achievers tend to be more independent in their thinking, less drawn to and less influenced by organizations like the military. Often during and after their enlistments, they question all the beliefs they were taught. So these are the people like you'll see who are veterans and who are have gone completely the other way, to the surprise sometimes of many veterans who can't understand how these veterans can be for peace. It's very unusual. So this is let me put this over here again. This is an article. This is your war kids selling war to World War I to American children. So this starts way back. So adults during World War I took great interest in consciously fashioning. Let's see, let me get this up here. A presentation of the war to children. Traditional school curriculum became infused with war-related material. Beyond that, many government, service, and commercial entities took a keen interest in presenting the war to America's youth. All wars depend on being able to recruit the imagination of the young. Efforts to provide European children with toys depicting wartime themes trivialize the war as a game. Adon Rousseau noted children publications celebrated children themselves as war heroes. In Germany, the Boy Scout movement particularly helped transmit martial values to youth. First World War's well-organized and thorough uptake of children into a war culture reflected a growing 20th century science of mass persuasion techniques through large-scale mass media that would flower into World War II. By 1939 to 45, the child was a foot soldier in children's war. Ideals of a quasi-military nature still today reflect the missions of some American groups promising values-based learning for children, notably scouting, ROTC, some sports, and martial arts. Military academies are still popular places to send children who are presumed to need the character moral building of soldiers. And there's an important distinction here between moral development and character education. Moral development basically stimulates critical thinking and introduces moral dilemmas for people to discuss and look at the why the dilemmas and what decisions are made in terms of which way one will go in resolving the dilemma. Character education is more like indoctrination, telling people what they should really believe. So it's a very different thing. Moral development is not popular in schools because a lot of people are afraid to have their authority questions, teachers, parents, and so forth. Whereas in character education, it's kind of a one-way direction. You're telling them what's important, what values are important. But moral development is education is messy. Lots of questions arise. Lots of controversy is raised. And so that's why it's not necessarily popular, much less popular today than it was. Readers of the American Boy, as reflected in that publication's writing contest, chose to establish war's legitimacy by hailing military virtues as a way to prove manliness and build character. George Buchanan, age 12, from Illinois, wrote, "Military training develops a boy physically, mentally, and morally. Physically by training to right living, clean habits, and definite athletics, such as running, hiking, and military maneuvers." Patriotism, the feeling of gratitude for the country in which one resides, has been an underlying theme of these children's publications long before the war. And we right now have a lot of people talking about teaching patriotism more actively in schools. So it's interesting. I met a professor at Plymouth State who was escaped from Nazi Germany. And he ended up to be one of the Ritchie boys, Jewish soldiers who went behind the lines to spy on Germans, a very dangerous thing. And he said when he first got to the United States as a boy and he went to his first classroom and they recited the Pledge of Allegiance, he said he thought he was back in Nazi Germany again. So interesting. The ideal American boy determined by American Boy would be patriotic, and so observed the editor as war became probable. Remember that your country is in danger and neglect no opportunities to stand by the flag. It's interesting also that that flags are flown in synagogues and churches when it seemed to me the Earth flag would be much more appropriate to hang in those institutions. In uniting nationalism and religion it helps to perpetuate the system we're talking about right now. Probably the most well-known, I can't even read this US screen sharing. Can't get rid of some of this stuff. Probably the most well-known appeal at the time to children was written originally for the rally, Why We Are at War, published in the rally February 1918 by Joseph Daskert Bacon, identified as Vice Commissioner of the Girl Scout Council, was widely reprinted and drew compliments from Theodore Roosevelt and other prominent pro-war leaders, legitimized the war for children by describing it as a playground dispute. That sounds awful familiar too. American Boy, for example, seemed to place the war for American boys in the context of an athletic game, the good fight against a respected adversary. Children's publications devoted nearly their entire content most months to consideration of wartime values in children and how they ought to respond. Editors of American Boy directly emphasized the shame a boy might feel if he did not act out to support the war. Our children were exhorted to do their bit for the war. It did not matter that they were civilians or minors, plant gardens, lend money to the government, prepare to serve, join groups for boys, write letters, knit sweaters, make medical supplies, save all newspapers, make Christmas gifts, mail music, go fishing with Uncle Sam. Bristol steel fishing rods are patriotic tools. Raise pigeons, give away their dog, buy things. The United States Department of Labor has formed the Boys Working Reserve, United States of America, and is now enrolling the names of lads who are willing to able to serve their country along the lines worked out for them by the department. Children were expected to build their lives around wartime values and activities. Not since the days of the clipper ships, when America bred a race of Vikings, has the sea called so strongly to the boys of the United States as it does today. Promoting the war as a call to duty for patriotism saw repeated use in these children's publications, reflecting the value of nationalism so influential in Western nations during this period. War could improve speech. Patriotic resolution for boys and girls. I love the United States of America. I love my country's flag. I love my country's language. War could offer formal education. War could encourage obedience. War could encourage a work ethic. War could improve health. War could build a fighting character. War could be amusing and exciting and painful, mostly in the abstract. Such a hope has been the motivation of many 17 and 18-year-olds who chose to follow the colors. Video games. Video games teach children to kill without current perspectives. Video games teach children to kill without consequences and to desensitize them to killing. They also prevent imagination, a filter for aggression. Let me go back to this a little bit. Before Vietnam, about 50% of the guns used in war were not fired at all. In the Revolutionary War, more than half the guns on the battlefield picked up after were fully loaded. Many pilots dropped their bombs in the ocean rather than on people. So there was this real, and that we're wired not to kill each other, and that has to be kind of conditioned when we do kill people. So what happened was that the military understood this, so they created a series of video games. So instead of shooting bullseyes, which don't show up in battle, they had real people pop up, and if you shot a civilian target, you would lose points. So they were very strict about that. So, but what happened was they were so successful in conditioning soldiers to kill through these video games that almost all during Vietnam and afterwards, the firing rate was over 95%. So most guns were fired. The problem is that these same video games are used in arcades without safeguards. There are no civilians that pop up where people lose points. And so kids are basically being conditioned to kill, and part of that is to join the military, for example. So what happened when we were younger, many of us were younger, we would listen to shows like The Shadow on radio. I don't know if anybody remembers that. And we would watch Hitchcock movies, where you would have to actually use your imagination to see what was happening in those, like in Psycho, for example. And now heads roll off, limbs are torn off, heads are blown up, and so forth. So the imagination has been removed, and so the impulse now is given direct expression because it's not filtered anymore. There's nothing left to the imagination, and that presents a real problem. JROTC programs teach a curriculum that emphasizes uniformity, conformity, and serve as a recruiting tool. They appeal to adolescents' need for affiliation and identity. In fact, they call it junior officer training school, but it's basically designed to inflate the enlisted ranks. Most kids who complete JROTC programs end up to be in the enlisted ranks. They don't become officers. So it's a recruiting tool. And people have, there's a Secretary of Defense, I don't remember his name, from Maine. He actually stated that's in writing, for example. News outlets show how welcome soldiers are when coming home from war and how they are called heroes and America's best. They also hide the horrors of war when they embed journalists. They also show how war makes boys into real men. Education focuses on wars and war heroes with a general absence of peace education. Students are not taught critical thinking and media literacy. There is an emphasis on sports and competition, and schools have been seen as breeding grounds for bullies. And most of the bullies are athletes, and most of the targets of bullies are some of the smartest kids in school, of whom were many of the school shooters in the past. There is an emphasis on memorization to discourage student activism. Students' college debt has also discouraged activism, as does having a volunteer army. So there's so many things that are happening at the same time that contribute to this enticement of war in the military. Parents often do not supervise their teenagers in terms of internet activity, social contacts. They raise boys with premature independence, thereby not allowing them to have their dependency needs met and preventing them from expressing their feelings. When we don't let boys cry tears, some will cry bullets, says William Pollack, co-director of the Center for Men at McLean Hospital, Harvard Medical Center. Many parents of mass shooters had no clue about what their children were up to. Society provides easy access to guns by youth. Modeling of violence is done by people at the highest levels of government who encourage other people to commit violence. The fashion industry promotes military clothing. So, other. There are many ways that all sectors of society send messages to children, mostly boys, about how war is glorious and honorable, and many of these ways are rarely counted in any serious way, and it's their combination that creates the perfect storm. When a New Hampshire school principal was asked why his school didn't have a peace education program to counteract the messages the JROTC program was sending to youth, he said, because we don't have to. So, as these publications repeatedly issued formal calls to duty, patriotism, and moral responsibility, the fact of war itself was marbled through the child's culture through its appropriation into common childhood games and toys. Making war into a game or a sporting match could make it seem less scary and so more acceptable. Merchants took advantage of militarized childhood by offering products encouraging children, mostly boys, to think as warriors. And most of these advertisements appeared in American Boy. A toothpaste company advertised, you know how soldiers and sailors benefit from good teeth? That they must have good teeth in order to pass the physical examination. The twice-a-day use of Colgate's Ribbon dental cream and twice-a-year visit to your dentist will keep your teeth in good condition. And the advertisements for toys and games frequently favored war themes. A wide variety of war-themed toys and games were offered, including airplane and train models, air rifles, building blocks, toy soldiers, sporting goods, fishing rods, tires, bicycles, exercising machines, Milton Bradley Company's Big Dick shooting wooden bullets as fast as you can turn the firing crank. If you're a real live American boy, you'll want me. Every boy ought to learn military tactics so he will have experience and ready for his country, has to call him. So editors encourage the children to think with one spirit, one mind, one leader, Uncle Sam, with a single goal. Diversity was discouraged, and those who thought or acted outside the norm were harassed and put under suspicion. Most obvious targets were the foreign-born, and children were encouraged to correct behavior considered to be un-American. No middle ground of opinion could be allowed. In this country, there are just two kinds of people, Americans and traitors. You've got to be with one or the other. If you're back of your country with every ounce of your energy and your whole heart, if you're willing to work and sacrifice to bring victory to her in this just cause, then you are an American. If you are not, you're a traitor. As conformism became a virtue, war became part of nearly every part of the child's world that could be influenced by adults. School was used as excellent preparation for soldiers. Even the children under 5 have an organization known as the, where am I? As the khaki babes. These infants in uniform assemble kindergarten fashion and solemnly snip for the Red Cross. There are many ways that the sector of society sends messages to mostly boys and so forth, and I already talked about this. So that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to get your thoughts and maybe some areas that I missed that entice children into war, because you also have a lot of knowledge on this subject. And I just wanted to get your ideas on that as well, so we can have a discussion for the rest of the time.
Great, thank you so much, Leo. Do you want to undo your screen share?
Yeah.
And folks can use the chat for questions, but I'm also going to say once, if we can get, right now I can't see much of the screen, but you can start. Yeah, thank you, Leo. Great. So if you'd rather, ask it with your voice, that's okay. We have enough time. So you can, raise a hand, especially with that reaction button thing, or put a question into chat. So yes, Sylvia, I see your hand. Go for it.
Yes, when I read the title, I thought that we will address the media like the newspapers and things like that. Would you cover that part? I have gotten quite a bit from what you have just said, some statistics and how pervasive is this education from schools, from the government, from whatever. But specifically media in my mind is like newspapers and TVs and
Yeah. Kids don't read a lot of newspapers. In fact, I don't even think they watch TV that much. Most of their knowledge comes from social media, from video games, and things like that. So, and of course, in education, and much education is sanitized. We don't tell children the truth about history. We make a lot of things go away, and we emphasize war heroes, battles, and things like that. And we hardly ever mention peace education. I taught a graduate class called Advanced Human Development, and I used a book called The Great Peacemakers to show my students what fully developed people look like. And my graduate students were extremely angry that no one had ever taught them about any of these people in school. And they were very upset. I mean, they knew some of the important ones like Martin Luther King and Gandhi, but there were so many others that they never heard of, like Anderson Sa of Brazil, who created reggae music and took thousands of kids off drugs. Or Wangari Maathai, who planted 1 million trees in Kenya and then started spreading that all around Africa. They were just very upset. So we keep a lot of knowledge from students. And school is the major media source for kids. They spend most of their days there.
Thanks, Leo. And I know that you know your focus is on children, but for us previous children, could you say a little more about, you know, the media, you know, the sort of education system for those of us out of the education system, and how that plays into the selling of war? Could you speak to that a bit?
A little bit, yeah. Freud once said that the child is father of the man. And so basically, you know, a lot of the ways that we look at things now were basically formed in our youth. And so that's a keeper in a way, and that's what we come to. But right now, again, the media is very distorted in what it sends out, what it leaves out, what it adds. As I mentioned, a lot of emphasis is put on the soldiers coming home and so forth. Rarely does anyone talk about the human rights activists who sacrificed their lives for our freedom. I don't know what freedom the military has brought us at all. You know, voting rights, human rights, civil rights, those are all brought by human rights workers. And no one talks about those as America's best and so forth. It seems to be always tied to the military. So the adults are getting bombarded with this kind of knowledge presentation as well on the media. And they leave a lot of things out of the news that are important. They spend a lot of time on silly stuff, and really important stuff is not covered. You can't see Noam Chomsky on any on any news program because they're scared to death of him about what he might say. So there are errors of omission are probably the most serious thing that happen in the media. We just don't get information, and the information we get is very sanitized and one-sided. We don't get the truth. The truth is the truth doesn't sell, and the truth makes people upset, so to speak. People seem to love to be lied to, and they attack people who tell them the truth. So, Will, you had a...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Will?
Yeah, Leo, hi. Leo and I have a long history of combating junior ROTC, or trying to, in New Hampshire. We always called it a military training and indoctrination program. But in terms of media, I'm thinking about a book, maybe Leo, I think, I'm not sure how many people have heard of this book. It's by an author by the name of Nick Turse, T-U-R-S-E. And the actual title is called The Complex. And the subtitle is How the Military Invades Our Everyday Lives. Now, just to cite a few examples, I could say the Ninja Turtles. The present movie that is the, I guess, the follow-up to the original Top Gun, is a military sanctioned, supported propaganda film for war and for recruiting. Just as these air shows that are popular. I know we've spoken out, Vets for Peace and other peace groups have condemned these war shows. Again, little kids are going and watching the flyovers at athletic events. The glamorization, glorification in the media of young people taking the oath as they're graduating. I don't know how many graduations I've seen where the principal says, okay, anybody who's enlisted, stand up and let's give them a round of applause. I mean, it's really disgusting and obscene, I think. So, Leo, have you heard that book by Nick Church?
No, I haven't, but I certainly
Okay,
would like
it's
to.
not a new one, just like Edward Herman and Chomsky's book called Manufacturing Consent. And you know, 6 corporations control about, what is it now, 90% of what we see, what we hear. And, you know, many of them are affiliated with war
Right,
and
right,
profiting
right.
from war. So,
And-
Leo, how do we address that?
Yeah, well, one of the problems is that many reporters may be liberal, some may be left, but most of the editors are conservative. So they decide what goes in and what goes out, what goes on the 5th page, what goes on the 1st page. And
Right.
so that's because, again, about 6 to 10 corporations own all the media outlets in the country: radio, TV, magazines, newspapers, and so forth. And so there's a lot of control of the news,
Right.
you know, by those people. And so,
How about Phil Donahue? Do you all remember him? He was on MSNBC, and the lead up to the war against the attack against Iraq, the shock and awe. And Phil would have on guests from, you know, both sides, but apparently the people in charge of MSNBC didn't like the people Phil had on. And he usually had 2 pro-war people and only 1 pro-peace person. Phil was fired. And another guy, I can't think of his name right now, was also a progressive. He was fired. Keith Overman, I think he left. But anyway, it's about money. It's about profit. And who funds these people? The military industrial complex, the big oil companies, people who make money, who profit from war using so-called our media, which we are captive to, unless we go to alternate sources.
there's a magazine called The Chronicle. It's a higher ed magazine put out for faculty, college faculty members. And I remember in the late 90s reading The Chronicle, and they also put in employment ads. And at that time, professors were making maybe 45, 50,000 a year. There was an ad for a weapons design assistant professor, $90,000. And don't forget, a lot of colleges and universities get money from the government to do war-related research. And I remember once, some of you might know who Paulo Freire is. He's he believes in radical democracy. And he was once disinvited to Harvard because he, like Noam Chomsky, was a person that people are very much afraid of because of what he might say. And then that's what happens. We keep these people away in a sense, or we invite them to very small, restrictive audiences, you know, with their views, like the I can't remember the name of it, but there's a speaking center, a speaking group at Keene State and Plymouth State, where they bring in controversial speakers, and they're very good. But I can't think of the name of the family that sponsors it right offhand. But
That's okay.
but pardon me?
I said, great. That's great, Leo. Sorry, were you going to say more? I
No,
have some
no,
other
I-
hands up, so I was gonna. And
Okay.
thank you, Will, for bringing in some really great points. I saw Craig had a hand a little while ago. Did you still have one? A question, Craig?
I do still have a hand, yes.
Great.
I've got two, actually. Yeah, thank you for the Noam Chomsky comment. I've always noticed that he is on no program. And I mean that, you know, he's on Democracy Now!, but on nothing else. Over a decade ago, I read newspapers and magazines with a razor blade. And I cut out things, and I just got up and was trying to find that album, and I can't. But one of the topics, or rather the media will refer to certain issues in countries in certain ways and refer to other countries in other ways. And for instance, and this is no surprise, but if you look through the New York Times, in every issue, there's some very positive thing about Israel. They've got this new project they're working on, and it's a 2-page spread, and so forth and so on. And laudatory words are used, and it's celebrations. And if they can get in some things on the Holocaust, that's even better. But if you have something on Egypt or Lebanon, if you have it, it's always some terrible thing that's going on, and how can they do this, and how come, and will they grow up, and so forth. And those are fairly common. Those two issues are quite strong. And then the other thing that I had is in that book was how they will use certain words, and I'm not even sure that it's conscious when they do this, but like Fidel chomps on a smelly cigar, whereas Churchill puffed on a fine one. And those words are used that way.
Yeah.
And so that creates an image between those two people. If you're chomping on a smelly cigar, or you've purchased a fine smelling aromatic cigar, it's difficult to see that those come from a reporting mindset.
Yeah.
And the more you look, and if you're careful, you notice the words that are used, and I'm always impressed by that. So,
yeah, I think the subtlety is the real dangerous thing. The things that come through are really not may not even be conscious on the part of the people who write this stuff. They are just expressing their own biases unconsciously through the written word. But the trouble is, the readers pick up on those nuances, and they introject those into their belief systems and reinforce some of the biases that they have. So it's not always very outright. In fact, if it were outright, it would be more subject to criticism, I think.
yeah. Well, you know, and then there's something else too. I mean, I try when I'm looking at the news to go all over the dial, in a manner of speaking. And they have taken away RT off the internet. Now, somebody with power is able to do that. So you can't read Russian opinions, because Russia is a scumbag. Putin is a terrible warmonger. And yet, you know, and who was the, not the fellow on PBS who just died. Give me the name of the founder of PBS, who's got the list of journalism things. Do you all know about those? Anyway, oh Lord, I'll try and see if I can find them. There's the rules of journalism that he has are things like this. For every story, there's an equal and opposite story. That's one of them. And then there's 5 or 6 of them, and they're just very, very good. And if you're looking at the news, you have to ask yourself, if you're I guess a responsible thinking person, okay, what's the opposite of this? I'd like to know about it, but many times the media, including, and I don't know how that happens. I don't know who cancels RT. Not that I'm in any way in love with Russia or Putin, but you want to know what he's saying, and you can't get that. I just can't believe that that's what happens.
Thank
So,
you, Craig. Go ahead, Leo.
No, I was just agreeing with him pretty much. Yeah, absolutely. It's again, the control is by the powerful, and they are not going to let anything in there that's going to make us think.
Right. And as you said before, the space for differing opinions and nuance is very, very narrow. We definitely have some other questions and hands up. I do see Michael is next, and then Siddhartha will be next. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, Amy, my question deals with the democracy promotion industry, which apparently took over for the CIA overthrowing governments in the 80s with Iran-Contra, but has since expanded into dozens of associated foundations and think tanks like the United States Institute for Peace and USAID. And I don't have the list in front of me, but there's about 30 or so different groups that are affiliated with the democracy promotion. And it's all based on a book by Gene Sharp, From Dictatorship to Democracy, which was kind of using a Gandhian approach to overthrow governments. So they said, you know, nonviolence is the way to go. We can make sure that governments that are unlikely to pay our bankers back can be taken down by the NGOs and all this. And so do you see that whole evolution in the 80s and 90s as being something that's much more positive than the way we were overthrowing governments before that with the CIA?
Yeah, Gene Sharp was a professor of mine at UMass Boston, and I was very fortunate to have his class. He hit on a real chord here, and a lot of people are listening to him even more now. I think that he's passed away, but I think that book allows people to see that the power they really have when they realize they have that power. It's that consciousness of raising among large numbers of people who take action en masse that really make a difference. Because if we feel ourselves to be powerless and don't align ourselves with others, then we can't do anything. And so I think that mass action is very critical, and I think it can be very effective. I mean, the research on nonviolence basically shows that most of the goals and aims of nonviolence actually have been achieved. Most of the aims and goals of violence have not been achieved. So from a pragmatic point of view, nonviolence is really the more effective approach than violence.
Leo, I actually think Michael's question, and he can stop me if I'm wrong, but I think what Michael is asking or is expressing his concern over the way that some of that information has been used by, for instance, the CIA to do propaganda, towards countries, that we don't want to go to the trouble of invading, but if we can, take over their airways and influence their minds. I think that, So can you
Yeah.
speak a little to that?
Yeah,
before we go into that?
non-violence has been used for good and ill. And it's such a powerful weapon that it's actually being taught at all the war colleges in the United States. And so if they can use that weapon in a counter manner, they will. If they can see that where it works for people who oppose them, it could work for them as well. And so I think that, and we can see many cases where nonviolence has been used for not good purposes. It's a political technique, basically. And so it's up for grabs, so to speak. And it will and it can be used for bad purposes. Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood.
That's okay. Siddhartha, you have a hand up. It's good to see you. I'm always afraid I'm not saying your name right, but go ahead, jump on in.
Oh, you said it right. Thank you, Amy. Good to be here. With regard to Mr. Thomas's point about the Chomsky-Herman book, it's now, I think, 35 years since it was released. And they make a very, very important point about nationalism grinding like a gear wheel in one direction and the dehumanization of the enemy grinding like a gear wheel in the other direction. It seems to me, after having spent many years thinking and writing about these issues, that if in America we were able to make people aware of how dehumanization works hand in glove with nationalism, and who the dehumanized group or nationality or religious group or ethnic group is at a given moment, we will be able to interpret these as early warning signals about who's next in the sniper scope of American foreign and military policy. I'm not sure that this is necessarily something that can be addressed by an article or by a writer, but as part of the overall curriculum in school, colleges, and in the media to sensitize people to when they're being manipulated. For instance, when Muslims swam into the sniper scope, as I call it, of American foreign policy, I noticed the New York Times inaugurated their coverage, adverse coverage of Islam by featuring a story about Pakistan, which was painted on a backdrop of red dripping paint with missiles pointed from there to here. That was pretty blatant propaganda. There's another thing that I think bears upon our discussion tonight. I'm glad to have this fellow. He thinks he's very interested in this program tonight, my little cat, Two-Tone, participating in the proceedings. And that goes to the idea of a late Harvard professor of human development, I think. His name was Lawrence Kohlberg, and he mooted the idea of a post-conventional morality.
Yeah.
And that society is essentially socialized people to conform by saying these are the worthy victims that you should spend your time and your money and your compassion on. And these are the unworthy victims, like Muslims, for instance, or the enemy, or who's the flavor of the month or the day. And you should not invest your time, money, and compassion on these unworthy victims. Lawrence Kohlberg took that idea and unpacked it and said that a truly compassionate society is a society that focuses upon the disdained. And that's, I think, another idea worth underlining. Thank you very much.
Lawrence Kohlberg taught a course called The Just Community in Brookline, Massachusetts. And he taught kids how to think critically and to look at moral dilemmas and so forth. That's how you get kids to function at the post-conventional morality, for example. And because what you do is you widen their horizon, you expand their view. They go from self to nation to world. It's like a big cone. And once you start identifying others in the world as being human like you, it's very hard to kill them.
Exactly.
Very hard to hate them. And so that kind of education is not welcome. And they, again, we're providing kids with the law and order and the good boy, nice girl type of curriculum, where we make them feel accepted and wanted by conforming to what we want.
Right.
And so the idea of questioning authority is the very thing you need to develop post-conventional morality. You know, it's like I'm trying to, Coleman said, he says, instead of answering the questions, we should be questioning the answers. And that's the kind of education we're talking about. That's what we need to really promote and sell to schools, and we have a hard job of doing that because of the conservative onslaught now. It doesn't want any controversy spoken in school. We can't let that happen. We have to stand up against that and go for that. Now, in colleges, professors have academic freedom, but I think many of them stay away from those kinds of things as well, from what I understand. So we need to figure out ways to make it acceptable to produce higher levels of moral reason, and that's a challenge, I think.
Thank you, Leo. And that was great questions and a great quote there about questioning the answers. Now we did get started a little late, but we have hit 8 o'clock, and I know we have not gotten to all the questions. I'm gonna wrap us up here. I have a few things to say, but I'm gonna invite folks to stay after, if Leo is willing,
Yeah.
and have a little bit more of a conversation. I can stay, so I'm gonna offer that. But first, I'm gonna do the official close. So let me go ahead with that. I want you to know that we want you to stay in touch with us at New Hampshire Peace Action. nhpeaceaction.org is our website, and you can also look us up on Facebook to learn what we're working on and what's coming next in our educational programs. There's a few events I'll highlight, the biggest being that tomorrow, June 21st, 6 to 6:30 p.m., we are hosting one of the emergency actions for Yemen on Zoom. We'll be briefing people about the situation and the current legislation that would end US support for the Saudi-led coalition's war on Yemen. We'll also take action during that half hour. This is an amazing moment when what we do really could make a huge difference in ending suffering for a lot of people. So we would love to see you there. You can also find that at actioncorps.org/rapidaction.html. I'll try to put that into the chat. They're doing them all over the country. We have one here in New Hampshire because one of our congressmen is considered very important in this situation. Okay, on Monday, July 18th from 7 to 8, you can join us on Zoom again. We're going to view a talk by Erica Chenoweth on the growing success of nonviolent campaigns. And then we're going to have a conversation. Most of the night will be conversation. Monday, August 1st, 7 to 8 on Zoom, we'll hear about Iran and the JCPOA with Jameel Abdi, president of the National Iranian American Council. He says we're reaching a US-Iran tension breaking point, and there's some things that would help us a lot to hear from him and know how to take action on that. So again, nhpeaceaction.org to find out about what we're doing and what's coming up. And this series is free and open to everyone. If you are able to donate and keep our work going, we very much appreciate that. I will drop some of those websites into the chat. We're going to officially close out and let Doreen turn off the recording.